All right, so like I said, my name is Lily Beauvilliers. I work for EmberCamp, and for people who don't know, EmberCamp builds a messaging platform to help businesses connect with consumers. That's my Twitter. I don't really use Twitter, so I don't know why I put that up there. All right, so the theme of this conference is it's easy in Ember. But before it's easy in Ember, you have to learn Ember. And maybe you have to learn JavaScript. And maybe you have to learn programming in general. That was the case for me. I did a 9-month conversion course. So I learned programming in 9 months and then landed my job at EmberCamp. All I learned was Java, and now I'm building in Rails and Ember. Holy smokes. And it was really difficult because I couldn't just do like the naive copy pasta thing where I just copy examples, because there were easily 3 ways to do the same thing all over our code base. EmberCamp's been on Ember since 2014. So we have old ways of doing things, new ways of doing things, and ways that we just spun up. Ay, 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 ay. All right, why is there so many different ways to do things? Well, part of this has to do with the Ember release cycle. So I'm going to consult my notes so I don't get this wrong. Handwritten, liberal arts kid. Ember has a 6-week release cycle. Every 6 weeks, the master branch becomes the beta branch, and the current beta branch becomes the new stable release, which is awesome. It means you get bug fixes and new features really quick. It means you get new features really quick. It means there's lots of new things. The great news on the other side is that old code is guaranteed to be safe for 18 months. Wonderful. But that means that for like big apps like EmberCamp, we're not always great about updating. So we end up keeping old ways and new ways to do things all in one code base. What a giant pain in the butt, right? But what if we could use all that change as a teaching tool? And I obviously wouldn't be here if I didn't think we could and hadn't done it in my own experience. So in my experience, legacy code actually means a code base that has a lot of history. And digging into the history lets you learn a lot about how web development works, JavaScript works, and Ember works. So I've got 6 examples for you from my own experience working at EmberCamp. So the first example is partials. Now this is our message list. It's got a whole list of, this one's user auto messages. It has the people who set them live and the name of them and a whole bunch of stats about them. And I had to make a little change underneath the title of the message to some extra information about the message. And I was digging in there, and I was so confused because I couldn't find the one component that had all the stuff in it. There was little pieces kind of scattered all over the place. So I asked one of my coworkers, what the heck is going on? Why are there all these little templates with these little dashes in front of them? And he said, oh, they're partials. I was like, all right, cool. So should I be adding partials to things? What are these? Why are they there? And he explained that actually partials were part of handlebars before components even existed. And the reason why they stuck around is because back in the day, it was actually slightly expensive to load components. And so for a page like this, where every single cell of that table is a component, that would have been really slow to load. So instead, we used partials. So as somebody who hadn't done any web development before, I hadn't really thought about the fact that anytime I put something on the page, it's actually going to take a bit of time to render. So this was a whole new concept that hadn't occurred to me until I asked what's the deal with partials? Which leads me to the second example. So on the same page, I needed to add another link. And this page is Linkamageddon. There are links all over it. All the users are links. All the names of the messages are links. It's just links everywhere. And I noticed that in EmberCamp, we had 2 ways of doing links. We had this link to component, and we also had this href2 helper. And I was like, all right, which one am I supposed to use? So as a very, very new developer, I figured if there's 2 of them, they must be doing 2 different things. So my guess, just naively, was maybe link 2 is linking within your app, and href2 is linking outside of your app. And I ran this by one of my coworkers, and they laughed mightily and said, no, it was actually because link 2 is a component. And back when components were slow, a page that had a bajillion link 2s was going to render a bit more slowly. So it was actually perfectly fine for me to use link 2 now. I also learned that href2 is something originally spun up by EmberCamp. So when I was Googling for it and having trouble finding information, that suddenly made a lot of sense. I didn't realize there was stuff in our app that was specific to us. And I was like, oh, so if I can't find something in Google, it's not because the docs are bad. It's probably because we wrote it. OK. Or both. So I wasn't really satisfied with just stopping there. I really wanted to know, why are components suddenly so fast to render? What happened? So I looked into that a bit, and that's where I learned about Glimmer and rendering engines. Once again, I'd never heard of a rendering engine before. I didn't know anything about this. So by looking into it, I discovered about Glimmer 2, maybe loading components a lot faster. That's why they're basically free, blah, 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 blah. So Just by asking lots of questions, I learned a lot of fundamental web development concepts that I didn't learn in my Java course. All right, example 3, alias versus reads versus read-only. So this is one where my English background really screws me over quite frequently. So I'm sitting there, I've got a computed property, and I want to give it a different name. So I think, what do I want to use? Oh, I want to use an alias, because an alias means a different name for something. And I forget, and I put my PR up, and my coworkers go, don't do that! And I go, oh, I did it again, you know? So I got sick of getting these comments, you can't use alias, you can't use alias. So I sat down and decided to tell myself a story around what alias, reads, and read-only actually do so I can remember which one's which. So all these images are stolen straight from the docs. Thanks. So here's alias. Alias is a two-way binding. So that means in the example here, we've got like a name and like a nomen. And I can do getting and setting on both of them. So if I change nomen, name is changed too. If I change name, nomen is changed too. Which means in most of my cases, I'm going to have like a really messy relationship between those two things. Neither of them is like the source of truth. Yikes. That's why my coworkers are freaking out. So then you have like one way, or reads, which sounds good. Like I would definitely want a one-way binding here. But the problem with that is it's not a true one-way binding. So in this example, we have the first name and the nickname. So the nickname is the computed property computed from the first name. So okay, cool. I have my nickname, I have my name. The person's name is Teddy. I've got their nickname. Their name is Teddy. And then I go and I set the nickname to Teddy Bear. Okay, that's a little weird. And then I get the first name, and it's still Teddy. So the way I think about this is I've just turned my computed properties into like a Y shape. One was dependent on the other, they were connected, and now all of a sudden they're split and they're not connected anymore. And that Y shape is normally not what I want when I'm trying to just give something a different name. So that's where read-only comes in. Same situation, you've got your first name, you've got your nickname, and then I try to do a set on the nickname, and I get this nice handy exception that says, nope, you can't do that. You've got to actually set it on the first name. So now my computed properties are kept really like clean and tidy, and there's an obvious source of truth. So there, just by like telling the story behind these helpers, I actually get to easily remember which one to use. And I'm delighted when I find aliases in our code base now, because I know what to replace them with. It's great. All right, so number 4, Ember model versus Ember data. So the folks back home told me that a lot of people in this room probably won't know what Ember model is, but if you work for Intercom, you do. So Ember data was actually built before Ember's 1.0 release, and it had a few breaking changes, and there were actually more breaking changes planned for the future. So companies like Intercom, who really wanted to get started with Ember, opted for Ember model. Ember model was lightweight, and easy to debug, and easy to customize for implementing your own adapters. And this was really fun. Like I said, I like to dig into the history of things to really understand like what problems were they solving, why were they invented. So I was looking at like the historical internet, and there were examples of people saying Ember model should be the future, which is not. But anyway, we got started with Ember model, and what we have now is both Ember model and Ember data in our code base, which means there's a lot of work to be done actually getting rid of that tech debt and converting Ember model to Ember data. I know like tech debt kind of sounds like gross grunt work, but I've actually found in doing that work, I got to learn about the whole concept of like front-end ORMs. I had no idea that was a thing until I actually had to dig in and take an Ember model and convert it to Ember data. And I also just like got to get some real hands-on experience with working with them without having to like spin one up from scratch. All right, number 5, classic versus closure actions. So this one I really like because, again, with my background being entirely in Java, I didn't really understand that there could be something similar to like compile time versus runtime errors in the front end. So when I encountered this difference between classic and closure actions, it really revealed that to me. So with classic actions, imagine you have like a grandparent, a parent, and a child component. The grandparent component has like a save action on it. Then the parent has an action that you're passing the string save to, and the child has the action that you're passing the string save to. The problem here is like I could just, I don't know, accidentally change the child's action to be the string banana, and I load my app, and everything's fine, and it's not until I click my button that everything blows up, and I find out that there's no action named banana. Closure actions, on the other end, actually pass like the name of the action instead of passing that string. So you have there, the grandparent still has the action called save, the parent has save equals action quote save, and the child has save equals action save. So now if I change the child component to have banana equals action save or save equals action banana, I'm going to, and I load my app, I'm actually going to get an error right there in the console immediately telling me like, hey, banana's not defined, you fool. Like, go fix that before you click that darn button. So that was pretty interesting to see. I talked so fast, sorry. So this one is my favorite example. So it's fixtures versus factories. So when I first started writing tests in our code suite, I noticed that we had all of these like neat factories. So I'll go through the differences between them first and then kind of tell you how I learned from them. So a fixture is just like a data file. You can put any data into it. This is an example of like some message counts, like how many you have that are live and paused and draft. And they're perfectly fine to use if your models are going to be really, really stable, if you might be the only person looking at them or messing with them, but they can go out of sync really quickly. So if you have lots of people working on your models, so they're going to update very frequently, you might want to go for factories. So factories, like the example here, the classic like vet animal example, factories actually instantiate an instance of your object. So here I have like an animal object. I'm giving it a default ID and a species of dog and a name of Spot. And the cool thing here is I can do, if I want to make a few different kinds of animal that I can just use very easily in tests, you can define traits, right? So I can do animal, comma, cat. And that's going to give me an animal whose species is actually cat and name is Fluffy. The problem here is that that's almost too easy. So I'm not proud to say this, but when I started writing my tests at EmberCamp, I noticed that there were tests that instantiated something called a message, and then it'd be comma, auto message. So if I was maybe testing a manual message, I would do message, comma, manual message, and see if it works. And it did, which was great. But it also meant I didn't have to do any thinking. I didn't have to actually understand what my factory was doing. It wasn't until I encountered fixtures that I was like, oh, I need to know what the difference between these things is. And remember how I said, if you're a newbie and you encounter things done two different ways in your code base, you're going to think they're for two different purposes. I did that here. I thought that fixtures were actually for like mocking endpoints specifically, and factories were somehow specifically for mocking like data, and they're not. They're just two different ways of doing the same thing. So I could have easily just used factories and never really understood what I was doing, but because I came up across this like different way of doing things, I actually asked more questions. Okay, so here are some takeaways. If you are learning Ember, and especially if you are learning like programming simultaneously with learning Ember, asking lots of questions about why things are is a really good practice. I find looking at the history and going back and asking like, what problems was this actually trying to fix? And also like understanding the story behind how a language was developed and why it was developed. If you are onboarding new engineers, I think keeping a list of your app-specific modifications is a really good idea. So when people are Googling, they know why they aren't finding things. And also keeping a list of tech debt. Like it's not a horrible thing to have people learning through actually digging you out of tech debt. So remember, newbies don't know the difference between old Ember, new Ember, and GUember. The end.